Hello everybody. Welcome to Deep Learning Cryptocurrency Educational Program. Today we are going to talk about blockchain. And my job is to simplify this concept. Albert Einstein once said, if you cannot explain it simply, you do not understand it well. Stay tuned, we'll be right back. Blockchain is a database that is distributed where all transactions are organized in blocks. Each block has its own timestamp and association to the previous block and forming so-called blockchain. Using distributed ledger and cryptology, technology ensures that every one copy of the ledger is kept synchronized and unique. For most of you, this may still be a question. What does that mean? That's why I create this program to simplify these concepts. So if you want to know the simplest and easiest way to learn about cryptocurrency and want to grow in this business, you can subscribe into my channel below and ringing the bell for my future videos. Blockchain is the most revolutionary technological innovation since the dawn of the internet. Most people are thinking blockchain is the only technology behind Bitcoin. This is true. This was its first application. But since then, several innovations in the system have allowed blockchain to spread far and wide. We will try to predict the future of blockchain, but it's very important first to explore its past. There have been 5 significant innovations in the blockchain system in just 10 years that have created huge breakthroughs. One is the invention of Bitcoins, and the second, the separation of blockchain from Bitcoins. Number 3, the invention of the smart contracts, and the fourth is the transition to proof of stake mining. And the last is scaling solution on blockchain. Today, our focus is going to be the preparation and separation of the blockchain from the Bitcoins. We'll be right back. Now let's simplify what we said. Blockchain is a technology that enables moving digital coins or assets from one individual to another. So the question is, what exactly blockchain attempts to solve? It is all about the money transfer. So today's focus will be understanding concept of the blockchain, not the implementation. Let's say John wants to transfer money to Susan, like somebody in US wants to transfer money to China. This is typically done using a third trusted party. Now I'm going to give you a simple example. Let's say John wants to transfer $5 to Susan. In order to share this transaction, John will move $5 to the third trusted party. So because the system recognizes this party, so this party will identify Susan in China and her bank account. And then, after taking some fees, it will move the amount to the correct account to China. This process typically takes 3 business days or more. What is blockchain trying to solve here? First, transfer money without trusted entity so people can actually talk with each other. Second, transfer money way faster than 3 days. I could say immediately. And third, to do it with a cheaper than third party. Now we are going to find out how blockchain is going to simplify this process. So let's see how blockchain addresses this money transfer process. Now let's talk about the concept of this process. The first principle or concept is open ledger. I will bring the simple example. Let's assume the network of 4 people wants to move money from one to another. At the start, I will explain the concept of the open ledger and how it's being implemented in blockchain. Let's say John has $10, wants to move $5 to Susan. What's going to happen over here you see that we're going to add a transaction. John moves $5 to Susan, and we'll link to the existing transaction. Now let's assume Susan wants to transfer $3 to Jane. We are going to link another transaction into the ledger in a chain which says Susan moves the amount of $3 to Jane. Finally, if you want to move $1 from Jane to Don, again we will make the same process. Jane moves $1 to Don. We will link this one to the open ledger. This is the concept of open ledger. It is essentially a chain of transaction, and it is one of the reasons that it's called a blockchain. Open ledger, I could call it chain. So this is the chain of transaction that is public to everyone. So the fact is, whoever owns the network would be able to see it. The first question that you may ask yourself, where is the money? And how much money does each one has? And the second question you may ask yourself, will everyone decide whether the transaction is valid or not? So I'll bring a simple example so you comprehend better. If John wants to transfer $15 to Don, whoever owns the network can immediately see this is not the valid transaction because John started with $10 and transferred $5 to Susan, so he doesn't have $15. This transaction won't be added to the open ledger and it won't be a part of the chain. So far, all we talked about centralized place that manage the ledger, but the blockchain goals was to eliminate the centralized location, like the third trusted party that I mentioned earlier. Here's come the second principle of blockchain. So the second principle is distributed ledger, which means blockchain is going to change the centralized one and distribute it across the nodes in the network. In a simple example means Susan can have a copy of the ledger and can hold in her own nodes. And so John is the same. When they participate in this network, they can hold their own ledger. Now, what we got at this level is the ledger got distributed. So at this time, we do not need the centralized place that held the ledger. So we got rid of the centralized ledger or third trusted party. However, we created another form of the ledger which is not centralized. Now we have various copies of ledger in a network, and all these copies are synchronized. And whoever in a network would be able to see the exact version of the ledger. This leads to the third principle of blockchain, which is probably the most interesting one. Now we are going to understand the concept of the third principle of blockchain, which is decentralization. But before we get there, make sure to subscribe so you can follow my future video and trying to ring the bell as well. We understood that the ledger is open and everyone can see it. The ledger is distributed across various nodes. And now we need to understand how this type of distributed ledgers nodes synchronize better across itself. Let's do another example. Let's say that Susan wants to move $5 to Don. What is Susan going to do? She's going to publish the broadcasting this intended transaction to the network. So everyone who owns the network will see immediately that Susan wants to move $5 to Don. This is the unvalidated transaction and it's not getting yet into the ledger. So in order to get into the ledger, we need to understand the concept of miners in the Bitcoin. So miners are special nodes that can hold the ledger. So in this case, let's say Jane and John are miners. So miners are going to do the following. They're going to compete among themselves. Whoever will be the first to take these transactions and be able to validate one and put it into the ledger, it will get the financial rewards. And in this case, it will be Bitcoin. Let's try to understand what it means to win this competition. In order to be the first that takes the transaction and add it to the ledger, a miner needs to do two things. First, miners need to validate the new transaction. This ledger is open, and you can immediately calculate whether Susan does have funds in order to make the transfer. Second, miners need to find out a special key that will enable them to take the previous transaction and lock to the new transaction. In order to find this scheme, this miner needs to invest computational power and time because this search of the key is random. So the miner is repeatedly guessing new keys until the miner finds the key and match this type of random puzzle. So whoever the first who could do it, it will get the financial rewards. Let's see how ledgers are synchronized across the network. The miner was able to solve the puzzle and be able to take this transaction and edit it in its own ledger. So what's going to happen now? It's going to publish or broadcast the solution to entire network. So this is not a validated transaction. So here's the key or lock that enables everyone who owns a network to take this and edit it to serve on their ledger. What miner is going to do, as we mentioned, John, for example, sees Susan transfer $5 to Don, so this transaction is already validated and can be added to the ledger, which means there's no point in resolving this transaction gets a reward. So John will immediately take this transaction and add it to its own ledger and will look for another transaction to work on and hope to get the rewards next time. So what we learned so far, we explained how blockchains work. We learned that blockchain is based on the basic principle of the fact the ledger is open and the public, which whoever owns the network can see and validate the transaction. The fact that ledger is distributed and essentially exists in many nodes on the network, so remove the dependency of the third trusted party. We learn about the concept of the miner, who are particular nodes in a network, and their role is to validate transaction and adds on to the ledger. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Enjoy the rest of the day.